everyone, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name's Emma, and if you're not new here, you've probably seen me do one of these videos before because at the end of every month, I film a video wrapping up all of the books I read in the month and telling you guys what I thought of them. First, for some quick statistics from the month, I read 8 books, technically like 8.5. But out of those 8, 5 of them were fantasy romance, 2 of them were YA romance graphic novels, and then I also read 1 classic, which if you guys have been watching my videos for a while, you may know that one of my goals for 2024 was to read at least 5 classics, and I've done a lot better with that goal than I was expecting to. Also, a few of these books are included in one of my most recent reading vlogs, so I probably won't go too in depth in them in this video, but if you all are interested in knowing more of my thoughts on those books, you can head over and watch my only reading fantasy romance vlog to know more about them. So in no particular order, let's get into it. I read Filthy Rich Fay by Geneva Lee. I actually got sent this as an advanced reading copy, which I feel so honored that the publishers and the author chose me to be one of the people to receive it early. I've actually read a book by this author before and really enjoyed it, so I was super excited to jump into this one. This came out on June 25th, so it is available for purchase in stores now. This was a really fun, fast-paced, quick fantasy read. This is an adult fantasy romance, but I would say the fantasy elements are a little bit lighter compared to other fantasy romances I've read, and this was a true enemies to lovers, which was honestly my favorite part about it. I love it when there's great tension and banter, and this was such a slow burn, which made the enemies to lovers trope even better in this story. This is about Kate and Gage. It takes place in New Orleans. Kate is a nurse at a hospital, and Gage is part of this like really wealthy family that basically like owns New Orleans. Basically, their family is super rich, hence the rich part of the title, and they own a lot of establishments in New Orleans. Kate's younger brother ends up getting into an altercation with the Gage family, and Kate ends up confronting the Gage family about this, and the book kind of takes off from there. Another thing I really liked about this book were how developed the side characters were. I'm a very character-driven reader, so I especially appreciate it when a book gives us a little bit more insight into the side characters, their lives, and why they are the way they are. This was one of the books included in my fantasy romance reading vlog, so I'm not going to go too much more in depth about it, but I believe I wound up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. Not my favorite book in the entire world, but I'm very glad I read it. It was super entertaining and really easy to get through. Something I appreciate about Geneva Lee's stories, at least from my experience so far, is that it is fantasy, but it's never overly complicated, so the world building and magic systems that are set up in these books are not too hard to understand. Once again, more info on my thoughts in that reading vlog. I also read The Prisoner's Throne by Holly Black, which is the second book in the spin-off series of The Cruel Prince in the Folk of Air world. Very complicated to say, but the original trilogy is The Cruel Prince, which I actually have back here. I read this early on in my reading journey. It's been quite a while since I read those, but I really loved them. And then she did write a spin-off book called The Stolen Heir, which takes place in the same world years later and is following different main characters. Now, the first book I was not a huge fan of. I didn't dislike it, but it just wasn't as good as the original trilogy. And then I picked up The Prisoner's Throne and was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this. This spin-off is actually following the younger brother of the main character from the original trilogy, and in this book specifically, we do get his POV throughout the whole book. And this one, to me, felt more reminiscent of the original trilogy. To me, this was significantly better. I believe I gave this 4 stars, which is really good considering I was pretty let down by the first book in the spinoff. And it's kind of hard to explain what this book is about without giving spoilers away for the entire original trilogy, but this is a fantasy romance, very light on the romance, but it is still a plot line. It's got a very whimsical fairy tale-esque vibe, even though it is a high stakes fantasy. All of the books that Holly Black has written in this world are just so fun to read, in my opinion. They are the definition of escapism, and her writing is literally just so fun and whimsical and magical, and I really feel like I'm being sucked into the story. And I'm very glad I decided to pick this one up. I was hesitant going into it just because of my feelings towards the first book in the spinoff, but I'm very glad I picked this up when I did. Highly enjoyed it. 4 stars for The Prisoner's Throne. I also reread a book that I thought I would never pick up again, and that is Animal Farm by George Orwell. I recently made a TikTok about books I had to read for high school that I absolutely despised, and this was at the top of this list. When I read this book for class in high school, I absolutely despised it, could not stand it, was so annoyed that I had to read it. And it's a short book, so the fact that I felt like I had to struggle through this book says something. And even now, looking back, out of all the books I ever had to read for school, this was my top #1 enemy. But since I'm on a journey to read more classics, I figured why not give the one I despise the most another try? Because now that I'm older and have a better grasp on what the point of this book actually is, I kind of felt like I would enjoy it more now as an adult than I did back then. I did actually listen to this on audiobook because it is free on Audible, and I enjoyed it significantly more than I did in high school. I still wouldn't say it's a favorite of mine, but now understanding the parallels and messages within this book and what the story is truly about, I do have a much deeper appreciation for it. I think I ended up giving this like a 3-star or a 3.25 star. Again, still not my favorite book. I'm probably never gonna think about this book again, but I am very glad that I picked it up, tried it again, and now have a newfound appreciation for this book instead of going through the rest of my life absolutely despising the story. I think George Orwell is absolutely genius in the way that he portrays these animals as nations of the world and as political figures of the world. And the story is just told in such a creative way with such important messages embedded in it. So I can appreciate and respect what the story is about. It's still just not something I'm absolutely obsessed with, but I did knock another classic off my list, and I'm very glad that I gave this one another go. And that's also made me wonder, if I reread other books I had to read in high school, how my perspective would shift on them now, because there are lots of others that I was not a fan of then and some that I absolutely loved in high school, and I'd be curious to see if my opinions on them would shift now that I'm older if I reread them. So if that's a video idea you guys would want to see me do, I could definitely do that, because reading Animal Farm has kind of inspired me to reread books I read when I was younger. These next 2 books I feel like I'm so behind on reading because it seems like everyone and their mother has already read these books and absolutely loves them, and I honestly don't know why I didn't pick them up sooner. But that is the Heartstopper series by Alice Oseman.
Hi, Editing Emma here, and I just realized that this whole time I'm talking about Heartstopper Volume 1, I'm holding up Heartstopper Volume 2, and then I switch and hold up Volume 1 when I'm talking about Volume 2. So just ignore that. I clearly did not realize I was holding up the wrong books, and now it is embarrassing to watch it back and see that I had no clue I was holding up the wrong books.
I've always known about these books and heard people rave about how great they are, but I think the fact that they're graphic novels may be the reason I just never chose to pick them up. But I'm so glad that I finally did. I actually probably would have put off reading this even longer, but like I said, I kind of got into a slump this month, and I decided that a graphic novel might be a good way to get me out of that slump. I had not read any graphic novels since like middle school, when I read like Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Dork Diaries, and I was kind of shocked with how much I enjoyed reading this style of book. I have nothing but good things to say about Heartstopper. It makes me feel happy, it makes me feel warm. It's just so adorable. The 2 main characters in this are precious, and I would protect them at all costs. Even though it's a graphic novel and we're not getting that much actual writing, I feel like I know these characters so well. Like, I feel like they are real life people. That's how much I enjoyed this. And also, if you guys don't know like what I'm talking about when I say graphic novel, it's kind of like this, like a comic book. It's literally only dialogue, and then the rest of it is told through illustrations. It was so fun to kind of just get back into that style of reading, especially for a story as fun and sweet and wholesome as this. And I'm honestly just mad at myself for not reading this sooner. I ended up giving this 4 stars, I believe, and then I went straight into the second volume of Heartstopper. This one I sat down and finished in less than an hour. I flew through it because I was so invested in the story, and I just felt like I was constantly flipping the page to see what was gonna happen next. I genuinely, like I said, feel like I know Nick and Charlie, like they're real people, and this story just makes me so happy and giddy. And if you watched my July TBR video, you may have noticed that I put this on my list for July, but I could not wait any longer. I had to jump right into it because I just love it so much, and I've ordered the 3rd book, and as soon as it gets here, I will be reading it immediately. This also is a Netflix show, and after I read the 1st book, I watched the episodes that correlate with that, and then did the same thing with this one as well. I believe the 1st season is actually taking place over the 1st and 2nd book, and I'm so excited to get to the 2nd season, but I do want to read the 3rd book before I go to the 2nd season, because I believe the first half of the 2nd season covers the events that happen in the 3rd book. I also gave this one a 4 stars, but now thinking about it, I feel like this one's more like a a 4.25. I did enjoy this one a little bit more than the first one, but overall these books are just so cute and wholesome and adorable and feel good and happy, and I could say a million good things about them. If you're in a reading slump or if you're just looking for something that will make you feel good, I highly recommend checking these out. They're easy reads, but the plot still makes you very invested in the characters and the story. And like I said, Nick and Charlie just feel like real people to me, and I feel like that's how I know when I've really connected with a book. I'm gonna stop rambling about how much I love these, but I cannot wait to finish off the other volumes of this series and also finish watching the show. These were great. And lastly, I read a whole trilogy, and that is the War of Lost Hearts trilogy. In the Only Reading Fantasy Romance vlog, I did start with Daughter of New Worlds by Carissa Broadbent. Earlier this year, I read the Crowns of Nyaxia series, absolutely loved it, loved her writing and storytelling, and decided to pick up this series as well. This first book, I'll go ahead and give you the rating. I think I gave it 4 stars. It definitely was not what I was expecting. I think I went into it expecting it to be more similar to the Crowns of Nyaxia, which is a little bit heavier on the romance. This is still an adult fantasy, and it is still fantasy romance. It was just a little bit lighter on the romance plot than I was expecting and heavier on the world building and magic system. I actually really enjoyed the world building, politics, and magic system. Just didn't get that 5-star feeling for it. This series is about our main character, Tasana, who grows up in slavery, but she's like a performer that wields magic, and that's like what she's asked to do in slavery, and her dream is to break free of slavery, pay off her debts, buy herself freedom, and join this group called the Orders, which is really hard to explain, so I'm not going to. But when she gets to the Orders, she realizes she needs to be trained in order to join them, and is given an apprenticeship under this character named Max, who is like the most golden retriever energy of a love interest in a fantasy book that I've ever read. The story kind of takes off from there, and it evolves into something so much more than I was expecting. This has very vast world building, but it wasn't ever overly complicated to the point where I was confused with what was going on. Like I said, very, very creative premise. The writing is fantastic, and I absolutely fell in love with our 2 main characters as well as a lot of the side characters. But like I said, it didn't quite give me that 5-star feeling the way that the Crowns of Nyaxia series did, but still very, very enjoyed and highly recommend if you're looking for a good fantasy romance. However, if you're new to the fantasy genre, I don't think I would recommend starting with this, just because like I said, the world building, politics, magic system, that all is a little bit more layered and complicated than some other fantasy romances I've read. But if you're already adept in that genre and you're looking for something, I would recommend this, like highly, highly recommend this. I continued the series with Children of Fallen Gods, and this one is significantly longer than the first one. However, I liked this one better than the first one, which is odd because I was just saying how I was expecting this to be more romance involved, and this one was actually less romance centered than the first one, but I did enjoy it more because the direction the plot went in was so entertaining, so fast paced. I could not put it down, and I was on the edge of my seat basically the whole time. It gets so much more expansive in this book, but in the best way possible. I was never confused, but I was always on the edge of my seat, and I can't really explain the plot without spoiling it for you guys because it does have so many layers to it and incredible plot twists, and I don't know, Carissa Broadbent is just a genius is all I can say. And it's interesting that I liked this one better than the first one because oftentimes when I see people reviewing this series on TikTok and YouTube, I hear people say that they felt like this one was really slow and wasn't as enjoyable as the first book, but I had the complete opposite feelings. To me, this one was a lot more entertaining. This one, to me, didn't have much going on in it other than just like training and the slow burn of the romance, whereas this one felt like constantly go, go, go. And even though the romance was less of a main plot, the moments of romance we did get were just chef's kiss, like literally perfect. I ate up every second of it. And then at the same time, the fantasy elements of it, the action, the way the politics developed, the creativeness of the magic system, like I could just go on and on about how brilliant this storytelling is, but I'm not going to. All I can say is highly recommend this series, and I loved the second book even more than the first. I believe I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Once again, I still didn't quite have that 5-star feeling, and I'm not exactly sure what it was because objectively this probably is a 5-star, but when I closed it and now after sitting on it for some time, I just don't have that 5-star feeling for whatever reason. Still phenomenal. Then we have Mother of Death and Dawn, which is a literal brick of a book third and final book in this trilogy, and I actually think I'm only a little bit over halfway through this book, but I wanted to go ahead and wrap it up because I'm filming this before the month of June ends, but I know I will finish this before June is over. So far, this one has some tropes happening that are frustrating me a lot. I'm still really enjoying the fantasy elements of this, the magic system, world building, etc. And this one's a lot more dark and intense compared to the other books, which I don't mind at all, and I kind of expected for an epic finale book in a trilogy. However, as far as the romance goes, there are some tropes taking place that I typically do not enjoy in books, and I'm not far enough in to know what my overall feelings are going to be towards that and how it affects the story. So I'm not sure what I will rate this yet, but I am enjoying all of the other aspects, and all the things I loved about the second book are being built upon even more in the third book. So I'm sure I will wind up giving it at least a 4-star. I'm just not totally sure on the specific rating I'm gonna give it because it's so up in the air for me right now. I will also say in the second book and this one, we are getting an additional storyline with separate characters who were not in the first book, and surprisingly, I might be enjoying that storyline more than the main character's storyline as of right now. And I do often hear people complain that that POV feels a little bit randomly thrown in there, but for me, I'm really enjoying that, and I think it just adds some depth to the world because this is a high fantasy and there's so much detail. For me, I enjoyed that we're getting that separate POV, and I'm almost more invested in that story than I am what's happening with the main characters. But like I said, there are some tropes taking place with the main characters that I'm not a huge fan of currently, so that may be adding to why I'm enjoying the other POV and storyline more at this current moment. I still do have a good chunk of the book left, so again, my mind may change on that by the time I finish it, but I did want to go ahead and include it in this video because I will be finishing this by the end of June. And if Heartstopper Volume 3 gets here tonight, I may actually sit down and finish that immediately, so that would be another book in this wrap up to make it 9 books instead of 8, but I wanted to go ahead and film this so I could get it out and post it for you guys. But those are all the books I read in the month of June. I'm pleasantly surprised with myself that I was able to read this much, especially considering I did get into a little bit of a slump, but honestly, I think Heartbreaker Volumes 1 and 2 are what started to pull me out of that slump, and I'm just praying that I stay out of the slump and don't slip back into that because I have a great lineup for July, and you guys can go check that out over in my July TBR video. It's already posted on my channel now. Let me know in the comments if you guys have read any of these books and what you thought of them, and also let me know what you want to see me read next. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because it would really help me out. I've also linked my TikTok and Instagram in the description below if you guys would be interested in following me over there, and also check out all the other videos that are currently up on my channel, and stay tuned for new ones to come very soon. That's all for now, and thank you guys so much for watching. Bye guys. The worst part about these videos is trying to get a thumbnail picture, especially when I have heavy books like this.